Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Morning in Genoa City broke with deceptive calm, the kind that made the glass towers of Newman Enterprises gleam like monuments to power instead of battlegrounds. Inside one of those towers, Victor Newman stood at his office window, hands clasped behind his back, surveying a kingdom he had built brick by ruthless brick. He did not smile. Victor Newman rarely smiled when he was about to make someone's life miserable. Across town, in a sleek but far less imposing office suite, Billy Abbott was trying to convince himself that he had learned from the past. He had money, he had influence. He had survived scandals that would have buried most men. He even had a tentative sense of balance in his personal life. If he were smart, he would steer clear of Victor Newman and let the old titan wage war on someone else. But Billy Abbott had never been accused of being consistently smart. His phone buzzed, the caller ID flashed a number he knew by heart, Newman Enterprises. He let it ring once, twice, three times, his jaw tightened. Let it go, he muttered to himself, enjoy your millions. He answered on the fourth ring. Abbott, he said flatly. Victor's voice came through smooth and controlled. Good morning, Billy boy. Billy leaned back in his chair, forcing a smile Victor couldn't see. To what do I owe the pleasure? The pleasure, Victor repeated softly, is all mine. I thought you'd want to know that the board meeting you're planning for next week will not go as smoothly as you hope. Billy's pulse ticked up, but he kept his tone breezy. Is that a threat? It is a prediction, Victor replied, and you would be wise to heed it. The line went dead. Billy stared at his phone. He knew that voice. He knew that tone. Victor didn't make idle predictions. If he was calling, it meant he had already moved his pieces across the board. Damn it, Billy muttered. At the Abbott mansion, the mood was lighter, at least on the surface. Jack Abbott was asleep upstairs, unaware that the peace of his morning was about to shatter. Downstairs, staff moved quietly, coffee brewed. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting warm stripes across polished floors. For a fleeting moment, it felt like a sanctuary. But sanctuaries in Genoa City never lasted. Meanwhile, at Jabot, Kyle Abbott stood in his office, staring at a file on his desk. His father's name was printed across the top. Kyle had spent years trying to prove himself worthy of the Abbott legacy. He had stumbled. He had risen. He had loved and lost. But one thing he had never fully shaken was the shadow of Victor Newman. Kyle's phone chimed with an encrypted message from a contact he rarely used. Victor is moving against you. Check the minority shareholders. Kyle's jaw tightened, so it was true. Victor wasn't just toying with Billy, he was circling Jabot again. Kyle didn't call his father, he didn't call Billy. Instead, he picked up the phone and dialed a different number. I need a meeting, he said quietly when the line connected. Today. Back at Newman Enterprises, Victor set his phone down and turned to Nikki Newman, who had been watching him from across the office. Another war, Nikki asked, her voice edged with exhaustion. Victor didn't deny it, they started this. Did they? Nikki stepped closer, or are you just bored? His eyes flashed. This is about protecting what is mine. And what about our family? Nikki shot back. When does that come first? Victor softened slightly, but only slightly. Everything I do is for this family. Nikki had heard that line for decades. Sometimes it was true, sometimes it was an excuse. Across town, Billy stormed into the Abbott mansion without knocking, heading straight for the study. He found Jack at his desk, already dressed, scanning emails. You look like hell, Jack observed dryly. Victor called, Billy said. Jack's expression darkened. What does he want? Billy paced. He says my board meeting won't go smoothly, which means he's got someone on the inside. Jack closed his laptop slowly. You knew this would happen. I know, Billy snapped, but I'm not going to roll over every time he growls. Jack stood, his voice firm. This isn't about pride, Billy, it's about strategy. Billy laughed bitterly. Strategy? Victor's strategy is to crush anyone who dares breathe in his direction. Jack stepped closer, then we outmaneuver him. Billy stopped packing. How? Jack's eyes hardened. We find out who he's bought and we buy them back. At Jabot, Kyle sat across from a private investigator, a man who specialized in corporate espionage. I want everything, Kyle said. Stock movements, silent partners, shell companies. If Victor Newman has even sniffed at our shares, I want proof. The investigator nodded. You're playing a dangerous game. Kyle's lips curved in a humorless smile. I was born into one. As the morning wore on, tension spread through Genoa City like a storm cloud rolling in from nowhere. At Newman Enterprises, Victor made a series of quiet calls. At the Abbott mansion, Jack and Billy strategized. At Jabot, Kyle dug deeper than he ever had before. And then came the rude awakenings. Jack's phone buzzed with an alert from the financial markets. He frowned and opened the notification. His face went pale. "What is it?" Billy demanded. Jack turned the screen toward him. A significant block of Jabot shares had just been purchased. The buyer, a newly formed holding company with no public ties. Billy didn't need to ask who was behind it. "Victor," he breathed. Jack's jaw clenched. He's not even pretending anymore. Billy felt the familiar rush of anger, of adrenaline. He thinks he can back me into a corner. Jack looked at him sharply. He can if you let him. At that exact moment, Kyle burst into the study, phone in hand. "He's consolidating," Kyle said without preamble. "3 shell companies, all linked through a trust in Luxembourg, it's him." Jack's gaze flicked between his son and his brother. "How far has he gotten?" "Not far enough," Kyle replied, "but he's moving fast." Billy exhaled slowly. He wants a fight. Kyle's eyes burned. Then let's give him one. Jack looked at his son carefully. There was something different in Kyle's tone, a steel that hadn't been there before. "Kyle," Jack said cautiously, "what are you thinking?" Kyle hesitated for only a second. "If Victor wants to play dirty, we stop playing nice." Billy's grin was sharp. "Now you're talking." But Jack didn't smile. He knew Victor. He knew the cost of escalation. "Be careful," Jack warned. "Victor never loses without taking someone down with him." Kyle met his father's gaze. "Then we make sure it's not us." Across town, Victor received confirmation that his first move had landed exactly as planned. He allowed himself the faintest hint of satisfaction. "They're rattled," he murmured. Nikki watched him, and when they strike back. Victor's eyes gleamed. They won't know what hit them. Back at the Abbott mansion, the family gathered around the study table, tension thick in the air. "This isn't just about Billy," Jack said firmly. "This is about Jabot, about our name." Billy bristled but didn't argue. Kyle leaned forward. "I've already set something in motion." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What kind of something?" Kyle's phone buzzed again. He read the message, then looked up slowly. "The kind that hits Victor where it hurts." Billy's pulse quickened. "What did you do?" Kyle didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned the phone so they could see. A confidential deal, a potential merger. A rival company Victor had been courting for months, now suddenly in talks with Jabot instead. Jack's eyes widened. "You went behind his back." Kyle's voice was calm, almost cold. "He went behind ours first." Billy let out a low whistle. "You just poked the bear." Kyle's gaze was unwavering. "No, I just reminded him we have claws." As the news began to ripple quietly through corporate channels, Victor's assistant hurried into his office. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's been a development." Victor listened without interruption, his expression darkening with each word. When she finished, silence filled the room. "So," Victor said at last, his voice like ice, "they've decided to escalate." Nikki stepped closer. "Victor." He cut her off with a raised hand. "If Kyle Abbott wants to take matters into his own hands, he will learn exactly what that means." At the Abbott mansion, Jack sank into his chair. "This is no longer a skirmish," he said quietly. "It's war." Billy felt the weight of it settle over him. He could have walked away. He could have ignored Victor's call and stayed out of it. But he hadn't. And now there was no turning back. The sun climbed higher over Genoa City, shining down on glass towers and grand estates alike, indifferent to the power struggles brewing within them. By noon, alliances were shifting. By afternoon, lines were drawn. And by evening, Victor Newman was no longer simply testing Billy Abbott. He was preparing to destroy him. The tension that had simmered all day exploded just before nightfall. At Newman Enterprises, Victor convened a private meeting with key executives. The room was silent as he laid out his next move. "They believe they can undermine me," he said coolly. "They believe they can steal what I have built." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. "They are mistaken." Across town, Billy paced in his apartment, replaying every word Victor had spoken that morning. He hated feeling cornered. It reminded him of past failures, of times when Victor had humiliated him publicly and privately. His phone rang again. This time it wasn't Victor. It was a board member. We have a problem, the man said. Two of our investors are reconsidering their support. Billy closed his eyes because of Victor. Oh, they're nervous. Of course they were. Victor didn't just threaten, he destabilized. At the Abbott mansion, Jack and Kyle were deep in discussion when the doorbell rang. Kyle frowned. Were we expecting anyone? Jack shook his head. Moments later, the housekeeper entered pale. There's a delivery for Mr. Abbott, she said. It's unusual. Jack and Kyle exchanged a look before heading to the foyer. A large envelope sat on the entry table, no return address, just Jack's name. Jack opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Billy, standing outside a building that was clearly not his office, a meeting he hadn't mentioned, a deal he hadn't disclosed. Jack's stomach dropped. Kyle, he said quietly, call your uncles. Within minutes, Billy arrived breathless. What's so urgent? He stopped when he saw the photo. Where did you get that? He demanded. It was delivered here, Jack replied. Billy ran a hand through his hair. It's nothing, just a preliminary talk. With who? Kyle pressed. Billy hesitated. Jack's eyes hardened. Billy. A private equity firm, Billy admitted. I was exploring options just in case. In case what? Kyle asked. In case Victor backs me into a corner, Billy snapped. I'm not going down without leverage. Jack stared at him. You should have told us. Billy's voice rose. And what? Have another lecture about patience. Kyle stepped between them. This isn't about lectures, it's about trust. Billy looked at the photo again. Victor sent this. Of course he did, Jack said bitterly. He wants us divided. Kyle's expression shifted as realization dawned. He's not just attacking our company, he's attacking us. Back at Newman Enterprises, Victor received confirmation that the photo had been delivered. Good, he said quietly. Nikki watched him with concern. You're pushing them. Victor turned to her. They pushed first. And if this spirals, she asked. It won't, he said confidently, because I will end it. The next morning, the markets reacted to rumors of instability at Jabot. Shares dipped, analysts speculated, headlines hinted at another Abbott-Newman showdown. Billy stood before his board, doing his best to project confidence. We're stable, he insisted, we're strong. But he could see doubt in their eyes. At Jabot, Kyle took another risk. He finalized the rival deal, ensuring that Victor's months of quiet negotiation were obliterated in a single signature. When the news broke, Victor's fury was palpable. They think this is a game, he said through clenched teeth. Nikki touched his arm. Maybe it's time to step back. He shook her off gently but firmly. No. By afternoon, the lines of battle were clear. Billy was fighting to keep control of his venture. Kyle was proving he could outmaneuver a legend. Jack was trying to hold the family together. And Victor. Victor was deciding how much he was willing to destroy to win. Late that evening, Billy received one final call. Victor's voice was calm, too calm. This is your last chance, Victor said. Withdraw, apologize, and I will be merciful. Billy laughed harshly. Mercy from you. Do not test me. Billy's grip tightened on the phone. You've been testing me for years. And you have failed every time. The words hit hard because part of Billy feared they were true. But this time he wasn't alone. I'm not backing down, Billy said. There was a pause. Very well, Victor replied. You have chosen your fate. The line went dead. Across town, Jack stood in the study, staring at the family portrait above the fireplace. He thought about legacy, about pride, about the cost of endless war. Kyle entered quietly. Do you regret it? Kyle asked. Jack didn't look away from the portrait every time. Kyle swallowed, but you'd do it again. Jack finally turned to him. For this family, yes. Kyle nodded slowly. Then we stand together. The next morning, the final blow landed. An emergency shareholders meeting was called. A vote was proposed. Victor's holding companies had acquired enough influence to challenge control. Billy felt the walls closing in. But when the votes were counted, something unexpected happened. Several key shareholders abstained. Victor's bid failed by a narrow margin. In his office, Victor stared at the report in disbelief. How, he demanded. At the Abbott mansion, Jack allowed himself a rare smile. Kyle, he said, care to explain. Kyle exhaled slowly. I didn't just secure the rival deal, I secured commitments, quiet ones. Billy blinked, you outplayed him. Kyle shook his head, no, I just made sure he couldn't play alone. Victor's defeat was not absolute, he still held influence, he still held power, but for the first time in a long while, he had been checked. Nikki entered his office cautiously. It's not over, she said gently. Victor's eyes were dark, no, it never is. Across town, Billy stood with Jack and Kyle in the study. We survived, Billy said. For now, Jack corrected. Kyle looked at both of them, he'll come back. Billy nodded slowly, and next time. Jack's expression was resolute, next time we're ready. Outside, Genoa City continued its restless rhythm, unaware that another corporate war had narrowly avoided devastation. Victor Newman had tried to back Billy Abbott into a corner. Kyle Abbott had taken matters into his own hands. And Jack Abbott had awakened not to breakfast in bed, but to a brutal reminder that peace in this city was always temporary. The battle was paused. The war was far from over.